guys, how's it going? Today's video is going to be a wrap-up. Now, I love watching wrap-ups. I find them so much fun and they're just so relaxing, and it's a great way for me to learn about new books and people's thoughts and quick feelings about them. And I've been wanting to do my own wrap-ups, but I don't always read consistently on a month-to-month basis. And I didn't want to do one on just my good reading months because I don't know, that didn't seem fair. So what I think I'm going to do instead, and want to try this out and see how it goes, is to do a wrap-up at the end of every season. So it'll basically be quarterly, give or take. I decided to go with seasonally rather than quarterly because I just like the way that it rolls off the tongue better with the season in the name. And also then it's not always going to be at the end of the month, it'll be like the week before, so I won't have to do my two like staple videos in the same week. I have no idea if that matters to anybody else, but that's what I wanted to do. So today's video is going to be my winter reading wrap-up. So all the books that I read from December 21st to March 20th, which is the day that this video should be posted. A few quick things before we get started. Any book that I mention that I've done a review on, I'm going to link the video in the description and in the cards. I'm going to basically just be going through the books, telling you what I thought about them, what I rated them, and just kind of my general feelings. I don't want to spend too long on this, but I still want to give you enough that you'll get kind of a feel of the book and what I thought of it. This is the first time that I've done this, so I'm still figuring out and kind of feeling out what works best for me, so bear with me. I'm doing my best. Also, for books, I always rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. I know on Goodreads it's 1 to 5 stars, but I don't know, I just prefer a 1 to 10, so that's what I'm going to be telling you guys. Before I show you all the books that I read, I'm going to get into some stats because I love stats. So this winter, I read a total of 18 books. Altogether, it was 7,261 pages. Now, I would like to note that for audiobooks, I didn't keep track of how long it took me to listen to them, so I just added the page count of the physical book to that total, so that number is including audiobooks. Speaking of, I read 6 physical books, 4 ebooks, and 8 audiobooks. Out of my 18 books, the most predominant genre was fantasy with 11, which is really no shock to anybody. 7 of the books were written by men and 11 of them were written by women. 5 out of the 18 books had more than 500 pages, and 5 of those books were released in the last 2 years. Now, you may be wondering, wow, it is so impressive that you memorized all of those numbers and just came up with them on the top of your head. Well, I didn't. I used my handy dandy reading journal. I've mentioned this a couple times before, but I'm proud of it and I just like showing it off. This is the reading journal that I created with all of the books that I read and all of my notes. I'll leave the Amazon link down below if anybody wants to pick up their own, but I have really been loving this. I'm so glad that I finally have a physical reading journal because I love writing down my thoughts and my feelings after I finish reading a book, but I hate typing on my phone, so I don't post my reviews on Goodreads all that often, and when I do, it's usually a couple days later because I just don't feel like going in and turning on my computer and doing all that after I finish reading a book. So it has really helped me to have a physical reading journal. It's just my personal preference. And it also helps because then later on I can actually type up my reviews on Goodreads without forgetting everything. So it works great for me, and that is how I have managed to collect all of my thoughts for all of these books that I read. So enough babbling, let's get into the books. The first book I read this winter was Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I ended up giving this book a 5 out of 10 stars. I was just very neutral about it. I definitely thought that the narrator's voice was so perfect and it just suited the character unbelievably well, but unfortunately I didn't like the main character, so while we had really great insight in his head, I didn't like his head. I think that if I would have liked the character of Horgan more, I would have definitely appreciated this book more, but as it stands, it was just meh. I read it. I'm not gonna reread it, but I'm not unhappy that I read it. And I definitely felt satisfied after I read it. It's also just one of those like satisfying, like once you read a classic, just be like, there, I did it. I can check it off my life bucket list. I now have the ability to discuss this book with people, but unfortunately, I just didn't really care about the character. And I think honestly, that's what most of my problems boil down to, because this book doesn't really have any plot. It's very, very character driven. Nothing really happens. So without a character that I liked, I didn't really care for it, but I do appreciate it, and I think I would definitely check out other J.D. Salinger books, but I want to take a quick break before. Next, I read The Bargaining by Carly Ann West. This is the story about a girl named Penny whose parents don't really care enough about her. She recently had a big tragedy in her life, and no one understands her. She can't really relate to anybody, so she ends up going to live with her father, but unfortunately he has a lot of business to do, so she has to spend the summer with her stepmother, who she's not very close with, fixing up this old abandoned house in the middle of the woods. I rated this a 7.5 out of 10 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was incredibly cliche. I mean, girl having to live with her stepmother in the middle of the woods, like, come on. But it was still really well done, and I think that if you're the kind of person that reads a lot of horror, I wouldn't recommend this, because it's so cliche it's kind of funny, but because I don't read very much horror, it wasn't too stale. Like, I knew all these things were cliche, but I didn't have to, you know, bang my head against the wall because I'd read them a million times. I just knew that they were cliche from the limited amount that I have read and what I've been exposed to. So if you are not somebody who reads very much horror, I think this was really fun. I thought the characters were really well done. This is another one that I really found the narrator's voice to really, really suit the main character. She's a moody teenager, but she's annoying because she's a teenager. But being inside her head, you really kind of see, okay, well, here's, you know, what she's had to cope with, and here's her trauma, and here's her trying to make sense of the world, and even though sometimes, you know, she takes her feelings out on the people around her and is rude to her stepmother, being inside her head makes that really forgivable. So I thought that this was a very well-written book for that. This also had a really interesting reveal that I didn't quite see coming, just because this book is so cliche that I wasn't sure which cliche they were going to go with, if that makes sense. And there's one part that I just found it was very kind of slid in there, so you didn't even know to be suspicious of it, which I always like for a plot twist. And it wasn't like a major plot twist, it was just like a sudden piece of information that you get thrown that's like, wow, that changes things. So I thought that was well done. I really enjoyed this book. Definitely hit all the spooky vibes. I had to turn on extra lights when I was reading it, but I enjoyed that. Next, I read The Hologram's Handbook by Robert Picardo. I ended up rating this book 9 out of 10 stars. This is the fictional autobiography of the character The Doctor from Star Trek Voyager, and it's just really, really fun. I thought it was hilarious, and there's just so many perfect references to the show. If you're not a Star Trek fan, I don't think you'd really get everything you need to from this book, because it's very short, quick read that's mostly references. So if you haven't watched Star Trek Voyager, or at least most of it, it may not really mean anything, I guess. But honestly, this is exactly what I expected it to be. It was a little bit funnier than I expected too, which is always nice because I love the Doctor's humor. It's just that perfect, like, dry, sarcastic sense of humor that I really, really like. I think it's hilarious, and it was just perfect for the little Trekkie in me. I actually just finished watching all of Voyager for the first time, like, a couple months before I read this, I think, so everything was still super fresh, so it still had that, like, I don't know, extra special something, and I just thought this was super cool and really well done. Next, we have Mistborn, The Final Empire. Now, I did read the whole trilogy almost back to back, but I was doing my audiobook experiment that I mentioned in the middle of this. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to talk about all 3 books after each other because that just makes more sense to me. So the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, The Final Empire, I gave 9 out of 10 stars. This book was just so perfect and exactly what I love in fantasy. If you haven't heard of this book, basically it takes place in a world where they had the prophecy and the hero, blah blah blah, and the hero failed. Now the Dark Ruler has controlled the world for the past 1,000 years and everything's a mess. Vin is a street urchin and she finds out that she has magic powers called allomancy. Basically the magic system in this world is based on metals, which is really cool and unique, and long story short, she gets roped into this plan to try to overthrow the Lord Ruler. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I was really worried at first with the magic system in this book. It's really unique and really interesting, and I guess I was a little worried that it would be a bit too weird to properly wrap my head around. And I will admit that I was kind of confused in the beginning because there's just a lot of terminology that I just needed to remember, you know, like the names of the powers and what the people that had that exact power were called. In this magic system, you can either control one metal or all of them. There isn't an in-between, and everybody that can only control one metal is called a misting, and they have a special title for that exact type of power. So I found that a little bit confusing at first, but all the names made sense to what the power was. It was just one thing to memorize, but there is a handy guide in the back of the book. So you can see right there, it has the metal, the effect, and the misting title. So I used this a lot in the beginning, and there's no spoilers in this section. So it just says, let's see, brass, effect, soothes emotion, misting title, soother. Copper, effect, hides allomancy, misting title, smoker. So very straightforward, and once you get it, you got it kind of thing. My favorite thing about this book was the world and just how well it was built, and not only the physical world, although that was really, really well done, but their history and society and the people and just their overall like thoughts and how everything worked and why it worked, and all of that was really, really well done. I felt like I was in this world. I felt like I understood their culture. Every single character was really well-rounded, and there was obviously the couple, you know, main characters, but all of the secondary characters really got a ton of attention too, and they had all of their own ups and downs and development, and it was just a really, really perfect book, and I loved it. I loved the world, I loved the characters, I loved the relationship with each other. Definitely highly, highly, highly recommend. If I do have to say one negative thing about it, I did find that the ending wrapped up a little bit too quickly for my taste, but aside from that, amazing book. The sequel is Well of Ascension. Now for these ones, I'm not going to get into the synopsis of each one because obviously they're going to contain spoilers for the previous book, but suffice to say, the series just kept getting better. This one was also a 9 out of 10. I have all the same praise for it as I did for the first book, and now that I'm really comfortable with the magic system, I found it a lot easier to get even more wrapped up in the world and everything that was going on. I will say though, the first book is like a heist book, kind of more adventure-y fantasy, but this one is very, very political, and the third book is very war-centered. So while I loved all three books because I loved all three of those things, if you don't like slower-paced books, the second and third book aren't going to be as well suited to that. But the story is just so good that I highly recommend them anyways. The characters are still incredibly well developed, and they just keep getting more and more real and fleshed out, and even when you think you know someone completely, there's still layers and layers being added to them. The mystery aspect of this book, I don't want to give anything away, but basically they're trying to figure out something that's going on and why it's going on and what it means. And I was really intrigued and invested in that mystery, and I had all of these crazy theories, and there was just so many like different paths we could take and so many seeds planted that I just had no idea. And when I finally found out what was going on, I was blown away because there's almost so many theories that you can't figure it out. Hi. I found this was really unexpected and really, really fun. Now, I mentioned this in my book of the month review of the first book, that the first book has an ending. Like, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, obviously, because it's a trilogy, but you can read just the first book without, you know, wanting to tear your hair out. The second book, you can't read this one without needing to read the third. This one's cliffhanger is so much worse, better, you know what I mean. So keep that in mind. If you're gonna read the second book, make sure you already have the third book on hand ready to go because you'll want to jump in immediately. And speaking of the third book, The Hero of Ages, I didn't think it could keep getting better, and then it did. This one got a 10 out of 10. I was just blown away by how incredible this book is. It also helped that a lot of the focus was on some of my favorite characters from the earlier books, so I really, really loved that because, like I said, the characters in this book are just so perfect. This one takes place a lot during a war, so there's a lot of slow building tension. Now, I do think that the payoff was well worth it, but keep in mind this pace was much slower. Just like the first two, I still love the characters, I still love the world, I still love everything about how this book was created, but in this book specifically, the planning was the best I've ever read. I genuinely think that. Like, as things wrapped up, you realize that little throwaway sentences and side little quick snippets from the earlier books become so important, and there's some things that you realize you completely misunderstood or guessed they meant something else, and just like, there's so many little things that the explanation was just hidden in such subtle little places, and I love that everything was planted ahead of time. Like, obviously there was big reveals and new information in this book, but sometimes authors kind of have to go back and like add information that we didn't see in the first book to make something later on make sense. But this, every single little thing apparently has a meaning, and just, it was so well planned, and this is what I aspire to be. Like, ow, I just bit my tongue. Like, there was things that were hinted at that I didn't even notice were hints, and just, oh, so freaking good. Honestly, mind-blowing. Just, I can't think of a better word than that. I finished reading this in the middle of the night because I meant to go to bed and got caught up reading, as we do. But I set down this book and I just sat in my bed and just had to process everything for a good couple hours, and just all of the things. And for the next couple weeks after reading this, every single night as I was trying to fall asleep, I think of something else, or just another little thing would pop into my head, or something else would click, and it was just so good. And honestly, I can't wait to reread this series eventually down the line, and so I can just like pick up all of those little things leading up to it. But yes, please read this book, and then please talk to me about it, because I need to talk to people about it. So going back a little bit, between finishing books 1 and 2, I did my audiobook experiment. The first book I finished was Sadie by Courtney Summers. I gave this a 7.5 out of 10. I liked it, and I definitely liked the format of the audiobook. It's basically the story of this teenage girl, and her little sister was found to be murdered, and they never found out who did it, and she's deciding that she's going to try to find out who killed her sister and get revenge. The second perspective is through the form of a podcast all about this mystery and Sadie's disappearance and all of that stuff. And I'm really glad that I listened to it in an audiobook format, because I don't know how reading the podcast would have come out, but I don't like other types of media in the books I'm reading, so I think listening to it was definitely the way to go for me. And also, it was just an incredibly well done audiobook. It had a full cast, and the podcast felt like a podcast, if that makes sense. So highly recommend the audiobook. The story itself I liked, but not as much as I think everyone else did. I've heard so many good things about this book, and I liked it, but 7.5 out of 10. It was good, but not great. It was interesting, and it did keep me listening and moving forward in the book, and I was intrigued with the mystery, but I don't know, I just didn't quite feel satisfied afterwards. And maybe this is because my expectations were way too high after hearing so much about everyone else's praise and opinions on it, and maybe that has something to do with it. And about 3/4 of the way through the book, you pretty much solve the mystery, or you have enough puzzle pieces that you can solve it. So for the last quarter of the book, I was pretty much just waiting for the characters to catch up, and there was a few little things that we had to figure out. Honestly, I found the ending was only okay. One thing this book definitely excelled at though was emotion. It's a pretty dark and heavy book. I mean, it's about a murder of a young girl, so that in itself, but there's a lot of other really dark themes in there, and you could feel how heavy and strong the emotions were, and there were so many moments of just heavy despair, and I don't know, I really liked that. I thought it was really well done. I cried quite a few times while reading it, and a lot of the just little interactions the characters have together just means so much, and there's just so much heavy emotion behind everything that I really found this book had a lot of really strong emotional moments. So if you're looking for a really strong emotional book with a good mystery, I recommend it. Just don't go in with your expectations too high. Next was James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. I listened to it on an audiobook, but I own the physical book, so I thought I would hold that up because it's pretty. This one I gave a 7 out of 10. I really love and appreciate it as a children's classic, but on this reread in particular, I would say only 7 out of 10 because I'm not the target audience. So some parts were just a little bit too childish, and there was a lot of really goofy voices in the audiobook, which is perfect for a children's book, and I would recommend it to a child. But since I'm an adult, it just didn't quite get the full effect on me, but I still love and appreciate this book. It's, of course, all about the story of James, who has a really sad life and no one to play with, and his aunt's so mean to him. And then this giant peach shows up and he goes on a little adventure, and it's just so cute and fun. I don't really have that much to say about this book. It's just exactly what you expect from a Roald Dahl book. You know, the wacky characters and just the fun weirdness that comes along with all that. It was just a fun, light read, and I liked it. Next, I read City of Bones, the first in the Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare. Don't get mad at me. Didn't like it. I rated this a 6 out of 10. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that I think I'm too old for it. And whereas with a kid's book, I can appreciate it as a kid's book and look at it through that lens. For young adult, and especially I find this is a very young adult, I don't know, I can't get into that headspace. So it just really wasn't for me. I honestly didn't like any of the characters in this book. I'll mention later that some of them do grow on me, but in this book in particular, I hated it. I hated Jace, and I hated the way that he treated everybody, and I didn't like Clary. I found her kind of dumb, and it didn't help that the love triangle is just such a big part of this book, and I don't care about love triangles most of the time. Like I've mentioned a couple times before, I'm really not much of a romance person, so having that as such a central plot, especially young teenage love that I just really couldn't care less about, I didn't like that very much. I do think that if I would have read this when it first came out, I would have been 16, so I think that I would have enjoyed this more, but reading it for the first time as a 27-year-old, it just felt young, the writing feels young, and since then I have read a couple of Cassandra Clare's newer books, and the writing style definitely does improve, but at the time of reading this one, the writing style just had me rolling my eyes a lot, and it was just a lot of really like cliche things that Overall, I guess I just didn't connect to any of the characters, I wasn't invested in the story, and the writing style kind of put me off, so that's why I rated it a 6 out of 10. But even though that one got rated so low, I still read the next one. Now, I have this problem of I need to finish everything. That's why I don't DNF books, and if I start a series, I usually try to finish it. Usually if I just read the first book, I'm not super hard on myself for finishing the series, but once I've read 2 books, I really feel like I need to, because, I don't know, it gets stuck in my head because I don't know how it finishes, so I think that's a big part of it. And for this book in particular, just because it's such a popular series and so many people that I know and talk to about books really like this and bring it up all the time, that I really wanted to see what the hype was about, and even if I don't enjoy it, I wanted to read it so at least I knew enough about the world and the characters to understand it. And honestly, I did like this one better than the first one. This one I gave a 6.5 out of 10. I will admit that Magnus definitely started to grow on me. He was starting to grow on me by the end of the first book, but this one especially, he was starting to grow on me. He was a fun character. So 6.5 out of 10, that's really not that bad. And then I read the third book, City of Glass. This one I definitely liked less. It was a 6 out of 10, but like barely a 6. I think my biggest issue for this one is that it was such a much slower book I found than the first 2, and I usually don't mind slow books. Like I mentioned when I was reviewing the Mistborn series, I really can get behind a slow build. But this one, it was a really slow pace that I didn't care about because I wasn't really enjoying the series and I didn't care about 99% of the characters. So the slow pace really felt more annoying than like build up because I didn't care what the payoff was. Like I really wasn't invested in it. Honestly, even the climax of it, I didn't feel excited, and I found so many of the characters annoying, and I think that's my biggest problem, is that I found a lot of characters in this series annoying, especially Clary. I'm sorry, but and Jace, basically everybody except Magnus, Alex, and sometimes Izzy I found really annoying. And after not enjoying the first 3 books, I decided to read book 4, City of Fallen Angels. This one was my lowest rated book. I only rated it a 4 out of 10. Honestly, I almost set it down halfway through, and like I just said, I do not DNF books, but I did not enjoy it. Now, I will mention that I've been listening to this series on audiobook, so it wasn't as bad, I guess. Like, it wasn't taking my time away from reading other books. I had it on, like, just while I was going about my day, when I was going on my walks, when I was cooking supper. So I think that helped. If I would have been physically reading it, I probably would have set it down and picked something else up instead. But whereas this really wasn't taking up any of my time, I decided to keep going with it, and I didn't like it. This one just focused so heavily on the romance, and some of the characters were just being way too whiny. I found Simon's little storyline in this really dumb, and I really didn't care about it. Jace was even more annoying than usual. Honestly, I was gonna rate this a 3 out of 10, but the ending was slightly interesting and at least made me consider continuing with this series, so I bumped it up to a 4 out of 10. Very, very last scene I thought was really intriguing, so I will say that that was really well done. Just the rest of the book wasn't my cup of tea. Next, I read the ebook of Gia and the City of the Dead. This is by Kristi Belcamino. She is a fellow author tuber. She also has 2 really cute dogs. This is a mystery book about a girl named Gia, and basically her family is killed and she's been led to believe it was an accident, and now people are coming after each other and something happens to her brother, and she's starting to realize maybe this isn't what she always thought it was, and maybe she's in danger. And so she decides to try to go and solve the mystery and figure out what the heck's going on, why are people trying to kill her, what. I gave this an 8 out of 10. I really liked it. I was so invested. I had a really hard time putting this down. I really liked Gia. I found she was strong and interesting and really flawed, but in a way that made it really fun to read. The plot was interesting. I had a lot of fun trying to figure out the mystery and solve it. I also really liked that by the end of the book, the main mystery is solved, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions. This is a series, so I really like when mystery series do that, where you solve the mystery and the first book isn't unsatisfying in that way, but there's still enough loose ends that you really want to continue the series, and I found this really did that well. I really liked her relationship with a lot of the characters. Even like her neighbor that doesn't speak any English, just the way they interact was really great, and the random homeless dog that she finds, and just her reaction to, well, I don't know how to raise a dog, but I want to rescue this dog, and just, I don't know, it was really cute, it was really well done. But the one thing that I wasn't super fond of is I found that Gia kind of leapt to certain conclusions really quickly without really having anything to go on. There was one thing in particular that is a bit of a spoiler, so I'm not going to mention exactly what it is, but she kind of just blindly like assumes, okay, this is what's happening, this is why, everything I know is now based off this one fact that was never proven. It was just, she kind of just decided based on other things and just jumped to that conclusion without any proof or any questioning. And I found that really annoying, but I still liked the book. I'm still probably going to continue with the series. There was enough seeds of other things that I'm really curious about how certain other things are going to come back into play, and certain things that I just really want to see what happens. After that, I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I gave it a 7 out of 10. It's about this group of friends that are in this really elite school, and they're studying theater, and everything is Shakespeare. That really just sums up the book. Everything is Shakespeare. But one of them gets murdered, one of the friends gets arrested for that murder, and basically it is now 10 years later. The person that got put away for the crime is being released, and the detective that put him in jail is still coming to visit him, and he says, okay, I need to know what really happened. I don't fully believe the story that you've been giving me all these years. Tell me the truth now. And he basically decides, okay, and the story is told mostly through the flashback that just kind of everything leading up to the murder and everything that follows, and finally what really happened. I really enjoyed it. I read it in almost one sitting. I had to get up and go to work, and then I came back to work and finished reading it. The mystery was really, really interesting. The characters were really well developed. Some of them less than others, but overall, I still was able to keep track of every character. My favorite thing was definitely all of the Shakespeare references. The characters sometimes just speak in Shakespeare quotes to each other, and I thought that was really cool. As someone who loves Shakespeare and just an overall English nerd, I found that really, really interesting, really clever, really well done. It really just added something extra and unique to the story. That being said, I hated the ending. Not necessarily the ending of the mystery. I liked that. I had kind of seen some parts of it coming, but I really liked the way that everything tied together. But I wish the book would have ended like 10 pages sooner, because at the very end there's another big reveal that I've heard a lot of people saying that they really liked it, but I personally found that it kind of just undid a lot of the other things, and it kind of just, it made some really heavy things just kind of lose their weight, if that makes sense. I can't go into it without giving spoilers, obviously it's the very, very end of the book, but I don't know, I found it just kind of took away from most other parts of the story, and I really, really didn't like it. I probably would have given this book like an 8.5 out of 10 if it wasn't for the ending, but I just found the ending so disappointing. But from what I've read online, a lot of other people seem to really like that ending, so maybe I'm in the minority here. I would still recommend this book. I still really liked it, and if you like Shakespeare, definitely check this one out because it was just so much fun. Next, I was able to read an arc of Fairy Tales in Space Dreams by Jasmine Shea Townsend. I'm almost positive that's how you pronounce her name, but I'm really sorry if I'm wrong. She is a fellow author tuber. I absolutely adore her content. I've mentioned her before. She has the coolest world building content, and I love her. She's so much fun. This is her newest book. It comes out in June, I believe. I'm gonna do a full proper review on this once the book is out and I'm able to get my hands on a copy, because I just absolutely loved it so much. I gave this book a 9.5 out of 10. It was just so good, and that half a point that she lost is really completely on me, but I'll get to it in a second. So this is basically a collection of short stories. They are fantasy and sci-fi. There's original stories, there's retellings, and a good variety of content. And one of the themes that connects them all is that they all feature a black main character, because one of the things that Jasmine mentions all the time, especially on her channel, is that there really aren't enough black characters in sci-fi and fantasy specifically, and especially for fantasy, when there are, they're usually the bad guy. You know, you don't see dark-skinned elves and beautiful dark-skinned fairies that often, and I really liked that, I don't know, she saw something that she felt was missing from her bookshelf, so she wrote it. And I love when people do that. You know, you write the book that you wish existed, and it is just so well done. I'm gonna link my Goodreads review to this down below. I just really want everyone to read this book because it is just so good and so magical. Like, her writing is just perfect. Like, the characters just feel alive and the world just jumps out on the page, and it's just so well done. My only complaint about it, that half a point that I took off, is that some of them I felt were too short, and not in a way that I didn't feel the stories were complete, because the stories did all feel, you know, complete. They had a resolution, all of that. But I don't tend to read short stories ever. I don't even tend to read many short books. So sometimes I'd finish reading them and I would just want more. And I still love them. I still love the ending, but in a perfect world, they would all be like hundreds of pages each, because I couldn't get enough. That is the only negative I have to say, is that I couldn't get enough. But I honestly found all 6 of these short stories really strong and really well done on their own. And I like that everyone was so different, but you can still clearly tell it's the same author, but the voice was different enough in each story depending on what the story was, but you still had that magical aspect of it, which I thought was really cool. I really don't want to talk too much about this because I am going to do a full-length review in the future. If you like magic, amazing writing, interesting characters, great representation, beautiful prose, read these books. Just do yourself a favor and check her out. The next book I read was The Shack by William Paul Young. I listened to this on audiobook. I gave this a 7 out of 10 stars. I really didn't know much about this book going into it. I was just really in the mood for another audiobook, and I couldn't really decide what I wanted to listen to, so I just went to my library's page, picked a random audiobook that looked like it had decent ratings, and tried it out. This is a Christian fiction story, I would say, and it's basically about this man and his very young daughter was murdered, and they never found her body, they never solved her murder, and basically, the course of the story is him kind of not being able to come to terms with his young daughter's death, and his family has a hard time. He has two other kids. Two other kids? Yeah, it's two other kids. And it's just them trying to get over this horrible, horrible event as a family. And through this trauma, he has lost his faith in God. Before this, they're a very, go to church kind of family, and he has a pretty decent relationship with God. Not as strong as his wife's, but he's definitely a religious man. And just after this horrible event, he's questioning his faith. He's wondering, why would God let this happen to this beautiful young child, and all of that stuff. And then he gets a letter. The letter tells him to go back to the shack where he last saw his daughter alive, and basically it'll help him get the answers. And it's signed from Pa, which is what his wife calls God. And no one else really knows about that such a personal detail, so he is really wondering, is it really from God? Is it some sort of prank? Like, who would prank, about this horrible, horrible event? And is it just him questioning everything? I would like to say that I'm not a very religious person. I'm not going to get into all of that and my religious beliefs and stuff right now, but basically, my parents were never religious, so we never went to church growing up. I basically just didn't know anything about religion until I grew much older and was able to start, discovering things on my own. So I found different aspects of this book were really, really preachy at times and was kind of laying it on too thick, but I'm not going to take any points away for that because that's what this book is about. It's a Christian fiction book about this man rediscovering his relationship with God. So if you don't want a preachy, religion heavy book, this book just isn't for you. It'd be like if I was reading a mystery book and I would say that I didn't like it because I didn't immediately know everything that was going on. So even though I wasn't super fond of that particular aspect of it, that's the book I signed up for. Now, even though I'm not a super religious person in the same way, I found this book to be very powerful on an emotional level. Even though I couldn't quite relate to, his whole complicated feelings with God and the difference between, what he was raised and what he currently believes and just all his experiences in his life, even though I couldn't relate to that, just the heavy, heavy emotion of everything he was going through. You don't have to have a strong relationship with God to be able to feel all of his pain at losing his daughter. It's one of those books that even if you're not the target audience, I think you'd still be able to enjoy it. You just have to be able to take it with a grain of salt if you have different beliefs than this book in particular. But honestly, I bawled like a freaking baby throughout so much of this book. I was working on a puzzle downstairs, that's why I ended up picking up an audiobook, because I just wanted something to listen to while I worked on my puzzle. And I had to stop a couple times because I couldn't see well enough to do the puzzle. And I had to step back because I was getting tears all over my puzzle pieces because it's just so heavy and emotional. And even just the back and forth of him wrestling with his faith versus what he's seeing around him. And deep in his heart, he knows that God is good and God has always looked out for him. But here's his reality right now of his daughter is dead. And I just found that really, really interesting. I just find sometimes a lot of religious novels get a lot of unnecessary hate, and I think that's because people with different religious beliefs decide to read those books and fault them for that, which I don't think is fair at all. So even though this doesn't exactly line up with my personal beliefs, it was still a great book, it was still a very powerful story, it was still emotional, I still bawled. So I recommend it, especially if you're the kind of person that already believes in the same thing as him, because I think that's going to add an extra layer to it. But overall, like I said, 7.5 out of 10. Just grab Kleenex. Next, I decided to give Cassandra Clare one more try. I had heard so many people saying that the Infernal Devices was better than the Mortal Instruments from a writing perspective, and a lot of people tended to enjoy it more. And I really wanted to like at least one of them. That's what I wanted. So I ended up seeing that my library had Clockwork Angel on audiobook, so I decided, let's try this. And happy to report, I liked it a lot better. I gave this one a 7 out of 10. Still not my favorite book of all time, but I really liked it, and I definitely think I'm going to continue with this series. I loved these characters so much better. I found them so much less annoying. I still don't like everybody, and I'm not super fond of the love triangle. I don't like Will. He's basically just Jace again from what I've seen so far, and I don't like Jace. So I didn't like him very much, but I love Jem. Tessa's really fun, and all the other characters are just so much fun, and I really, really like them so much more than the Mortal Instruments, so I'm really happy about that. Also, I like that I did read a couple of the Mortal Instrument books before reading this one, because like little references and stuff I don't think I would have understood fully if I didn't read the other ones first, and even just like little things thrown in or a mention of a character that you realize, oh, this person's, you know, related to this person, or oh, this character just showed up in this book. What? I didn't know that was going to happen. So that was really, really fun. I loved that. And I found the mystery really exciting in this one. Whereas in the other ones, I didn't really care about the plot. This one, I liked the characters and I was really interested to see where everything went. So don't worry, all of the Shadowhunters people can stop yelling at me because I liked this one. I'm gonna read the next one. I actually just put a loan out on the library for it. It should be arriving today, maybe tomorrow, but I'm excited to start the next book in the series. But yes, I was very happy about this one. And finally, the last book that I read this winter was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Why did nobody tell me that Laini Taylor's writing is so freaking beautiful? And I know that people told me that, but why didn't you tell me again? I just, wow. Like, wow. Now, I have this problem, I guess, that when a book is really hyped, I tend to shy away from it because, I don't know, it just, the more people tell me it's good, the more I think that they're just saying that because everyone else is saying that, even though a lot of times that's not the case. But yeah, I heard too many good things about this one, so I was like, I'm probably never going to read it then, I'm probably just going to be let down. And then I was able to get a copy of the ebook, and I decided, you know, why not? Again, just so I can know what everyone else is talking about. Beautiful. Like, beautiful. I rated this 10 out of 10, and I am so mad that I don't have the sequel yet because I need the sequel right freaking now, and I literally only finished reading this right before I started filming, so like an hour ago. But I just need to read the sequel. I need it. If you haven't heard of it, it's the story of Laszlo Strange, and he is obsessed with the mystery of this world called Weep because the real name disappeared at one point. I don't want to get too much into it because I'm gonna actually do my book of the month review on this book, and that's going to be coming out next week, so I'll save everything for then. But this might have been like up there with the most beautiful writing I've ever read. Like, absolutely mind-blowing, so cool. Like, every single word just felt like it was chosen perfectly for that. The melody of the sentences and just the characters and their interactions, and just I haven't collected my thoughts yet, so I'm basically just ranting and raving. Everything felt vivid and important and just placed so perfectly, and just, I even liked the romance. Right? And I mean, like, I really liked it. Like, as soon as, like, they first saw each other, and it's very, like, insta-lovey, which I hate. Doesn't matter. This one, as soon as they saw each other, I'm like, I ship it, yes, please. Just, too many feelings. But I need to collect my thoughts, so you'll have to wait until my review next week to find out all of my thoughts and, you know, give me a chance to form things into proper sentences. But 10 out of 10, so good. And those are the books that I read this winter. So I had so much fun. This was a really successful couple months for me. I really hope I can keep up this pace. My official Goodreads goal for the year was to read 25 books. So reading 18 by March is super great for me. I'm so happy, I'm so excited, and I just want to read all the books now. That's all I want to do, read every single book. all of them. But that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button so I know. Don't forget to subscribe. I post new videos every Wednesday and Saturday, usually reading or writing related. If you've read any of these books and want to talk about them, comment down below, reach out to me on Twitter. I'm going to leave my Twitter right here and down below, as always. Also, this is my first real wrap-up video, so if you guys have any feedback or things that you want, didn't like, etc., feel free to let me know. I do get my feelings hurt easily, so just say it politely and it'll be all fine. So thank you again so much. I hope to see you guys next time, and until then, have a great day. Bye!